God, give back to me the joy of your salvation.
Praise to you, Lord, King of eternal glory.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. There was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda. It has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there for a long time, Jesus said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the waters is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take up your mat, and walk." And at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath day. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well now. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse will happen to you." Then the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore, the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
We are in the 4th week of Lent. All the gospel readings, starting from now going forward, will begin to help us see all the allegations that will be piling up. The Jews will be piling up allegations against Jesus that will eventually lead to his arrest and eventual crucifixion. So John's gospel is a highly theological gospel. We're reading from John chapter 5, and the very verse 1 of John chapter 5 wants us to understand the theology of going to Jerusalem. because Lent is following Jesus to go to Jerusalem. And so John chapter 5 verse 1 helps us to understand the theological meaning of going to Jerusalem. And so he says here in the verse 2, now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, the temple is the place of sacrifice in Jerusalem. For any sheep to get to the high altar for sacrifice must have to pass through the sheep gate to get to be sacrificed. And so Jesus goes to Jerusalem and he goes to the sheep gate because he has to pass to go to Calvary. He has to pass Jerusalem like the sheep gate to get to the cross. So John wants us to understand. And then he says again in the text, he said there was a pool, which in Hebrew is called Bet-zatha. Now, we all know that in the Hebrew language, the word Beth means house. It's like Bethlehem. Jesus was born in Beth. Beth means house. Lehem means bread. So he was born in the house of bread so that he would give us bread. And then the pool was called Bet-zatha. In the Hebrew language, we know Bet means house, and Zatha means mercy, the house of mercy. So John's gospel wants us to understand that Jesus comes to offer himself. He has to pass through the sheep gate to get to the place where he will be sacrificed, where he will show mercy. That is what we call forgiveness of sins. That's why he comes. And then John continues to the miracle that happened, where Jesus said to the man who was sick, "Do you want to be made well?" Jesus has been coming to Jerusalem. He was there when he was 12 years old. He will have seen that man there. Our text says the man has been there for 38 years looking for healing. So Jesus knew that he has always seen the man there. Our text says there were many sick people there, blind, lame, paralyzed. But Jesus went to this particular one. And in Bible study, the question that we ask is, why will you ask somebody who is been sick for 38 years, why will you ask them if they wanted healing? But we know that that is how Jesus heals people. He will say, "What do you want me to do for you?" He said that to Bartimaeus. Anybody that comes before Jesus, Jesus will always ask that question. What do you want? So the question was straight, easy. Do you want to be made well? And the man did not say yes. He didn't say yes. And he didn't say no. Instead, he started whining. He said, "Sir, I have no one to throw me into the pool when the water is stirred. And while I'm making my way down there, someone else steps in ahead of me." But the simple question was, do you want to be made well? If he had answered yes, Jesus, in his usual way, will lay hands. Jesus, in his usual way, will look up to heaven and pray over the man. But because he did not say yes, Jesus comes for mercy. Jesus simply gave him a command. He just told him, pick up your mat and go home. Pick up your mat and go home. And there began the trouble. The Jews, our text says, the man picked up his mat and started to walk away. And then the Jews said to him, this is a Sabbath day. Why are you carrying a load? Why are you carrying a mat? He was carrying a load. Now they are referring to the number 4 commandments. Remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. And that is, the law says, Exodus chapter 20 says, remember to give us the 10 commandments. Remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. But it didn't say you cannot carry anything. But the man reported Jesus and said, the man who made me well says to me, take up your mat and walk. And so he says, I obeyed him. Now, something interesting now happened later. Because he didn't know Jesus. Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. And so our text says, later, Jesus found him in the temple. And Jesus says to him in the temple, now that you have been made well, do not sin anymore. You know, this is a very controversial text, very controversial verse. Now that you have been made well, do not sin anymore so that something worse will not happen to you. Now, what was Jesus talking about? Some people say Jesus was telling him to stop implicating Jesus. The instruction is, take up your mat and just go home. But he was more implicating Jesus. And that was exactly what he did. After Jesus told him to stop sinning, just go home, he says the man went away and went and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. And John's gospel, like I said, is a highly theological gospel. So John now says, from that moment, the Jews started persecuting Jesus. From that moment, when that man went back to tell them, usually when Jesus heals people, they give thanks. They praise God. When he healed the 10 lepers, one of them came back giving thanks. But this one went back and joined the enemies. And our text says that began the persecution of Jesus. So all through this week, we are going to be reading all the different attempts to arrest Jesus, which will eventually happen. But in the 4th week of Lent, it begins to prepare us for what will eventually happen. And so let us get ready for the mysteries that we are called to celebrate in these coming days.